Warm greetings to everyone. I hope you will find this short recorded webinar very interesting and very useful with regard to your teaching of reading and whether or not you think that the work I've been involved with in creating phonics programs and training will be of service. As you can see, the title is Teaching Reading and Spelling in English as the Main or Additional Language. My particular approach is two-pronged systematic and incidental phonics teaching, which I'll describe throughout the webinar. Over the years, I've gone from being a primary teacher and head teacher and special needs teacher to developing a specialism in the field of phonics. So I've created phonics programs and phonics training and provide phonics consultancy internationally. To support in this webinar, we have provided some detailed course notes. You don't have to print these off or look at them, but if you want to look at things in greater detail, they're there for you to take advantage of, and I'll make reference to them throughout the course. I'm not going to mention very specific research projects, but I am going to point you in the direction of the site of the International Foundation for Effective Reading Instruction. I'm a founding committee member of that organisation, and it's doing its best to inform people about findings in research, but also developments around the world in the teaching of reading. Historically, we look at these national inquiries into the teaching of reading because there was growing concern about the level of failure or illiteracy or weak literacy in English-speaking contexts. These are the major national inquiries that people tend to refer to. In particular, I'll keep referring to this context in England because actually we've made great strides in England with regard to official guidance in teaching of reading, more than many other countries and contexts. From America, however, it's very helpful to know about the summary of findings that were concluded or identified by the National Reading Panel. These are often referred to as the 5 pillars of literacy or the Big Five. Now, when you look at this list, phonemic awareness, explicit systematic phonics, reading fluency, vocabulary enrichment and comprehension, you'd look at it and think, well, what's the big deal about this list? That looks really very straightforward. But actually it is very important because what it did was put phonemic awareness and explicit systematic phonics teaching on the map when these had previously been diminished or abandoned in teacher training and teacher provision. So that's what makes them particularly important. Now I've picked out one single phrase from a gentleman called Dr. Charles Perfetti from the USA, because this really does encapsulate what it means to be a reader in the full sense. The hallmark of skilled reading is fast, context-free word recognition and rich, context-dependent text understanding. And Perfetti's work on the relationship between word recognition and comprehension is part of the bedrock of modern understanding about reading. So his description is really key to understanding about reading and the teaching of reading. In the United Kingdom, Sir Jim Rose was commissioned to conduct an independent national review in 2005-06. And what was special about this review was that it was informed by international research findings at that time, but also by effective practice and programs that Sir Jim Rose and his team of inspectors saw with their own 2 eyes. So it was a combination of research findings and practice or provision, and I think this is something that we should bear in mind. Sir Jim Rose said, "We spent a huge amount of time observing practice and noting the spectacular success of systematic synthetic phonics when we found it, sometimes in classes where a significant number of beginners were learning English as an additional language." Now, there's lots of mantras that people quote to try to query this business of teaching phonics to everyone. For example, but one size does not fit all, but children learn in different ways. But what Sir Jim Rose did was very clever. In his report, he pointed out All beginners have to come to terms with the same alphabetic principles if they are to learn to read and write. And it cannot be left to chance or for children to ferret out on their own how the alphabetic code works. The sad thing is that to this day, the kind of teaching children receive is still left to chance. The official guidance in various countries is still about chance because how we teach reading shouldn't be dependent on which country or which region we happen to reside or which university we happen to attend. We do know how best to teach reading. And the worry is that dyslexia, where children or learners struggle at word level with reading, can be caused or made much worse by the actual teaching method. So this is a very serious issue. In his final report, Sir Jim Rose recommended that teachers adopt the simple view of reading model of understanding reading. So this was put forward by Goff and Tunber as way back as 1986. And basically it's pointing out that to be a reader in the full sense requires two main processes. First of all, what is the word? Meaning that the reader needs to be able to readily lift the printed words off the page. And secondly, what does the word mean, or what do the words mean, or the sentences mean that have been lifted from the page? To be able to understand the meaning requires language comprehension processes, and that means spoken language. From this model, we get a formula. So the simple view of reading formula is that reading equals the product of decoding times language comprehension. And there's a superb diagram to go with this, which you can see on the slide. And it has a scale from poor to good and poor to good on both of those axes. And we're going to be talking a lot about that in the slides. So Sir Jim Rose, having pointed out that it's the same alphabetic code knowledge and phonics skills that all children need, he went on and he praised multisensory activities, but he warned us about extraneous approaches. Now this is still relevant to some current provision, because across the world there are hundreds of phonics programs and lots of phonics resources. Some are free, some are interactive and online, some are very child friendly. But actually, teachers work hard everywhere and should be fully informed about effective reading instruction. And I'm going to suggest that some phonics provision is still extraneous and not as effective as it could be. So what do we mean by extraneous? It's basically when phonics is introduced or provided for children with so many extra little bits and pieces and games and activities that the core learning or the core teaching is lost amongst the things that children are doing. So, for example, you might have to sing a chorus before you get to a sound, or you might have to pull word cards out of the sandpit before you get to the printed word to be able to decode it. Now, from classroom observations that I myself have made, I became very concerned about the interpretation of a document called Letters and Sounds that was published in 2007 in England, which is an official document, and it didn't have any teaching and learning resources. So basically, it was good guidance and it was very important at that time, but teachers have had to translate and equip it as best they know how. And sometimes this is done very effectively, and schools can get very high standards using that guidance document, and sometimes it's not done so well. So I've done a graphic here, which is based on the same structure as a simple view of reading structure, to show that systematic phonics provision is not uniform, that programs and practice can look very different, and we need to be able to understand these differences to be able to unpick why some teachers are more effective than others. Now, what we've done with the simple view of reading and Sir Jim Rose's recommendations, the emphasis on the decoding and not word guessing. So what we've done in England is replace the Searchlights multi-cueing reading strategies. And also, we're promoting that you don't teach or cause by default children to guess words from pictures, context, initial letters or word shapes. So don't ask children to read aloud independently books they cannot read without having to resort to guessing the words on the page. And the key word here is independently. So you're asking them to read that book by themselves or without support. And if the children can't lift the words off the page pretty easily or automatically, the child is going to struggle, and that's not helpful. It's not going to help them develop a good reading profile, and it's certainly not good for their self-esteem. What we need to do, however, is enrich the children's stock of words, their vocabulary, their language comprehension, and knowledge and understanding of the world through quality two-way conversations and reading a variety of books to children and sharing the experience. This is the diagram of the multi-cueing Searchlights model that was introduced in England way back in 1998. Now, however rational it seems, this model actually amounted to teachers being trained in a range of reading strategies for unreliable word guessing, which is not helpful. This is the three-cueing multi-cueing model that tends to be used internationally, but the same basic principles. And it's still widely used, so this is a current model in many countries for unreliable word guessing though. So when I talk about word guessing, what do I mean? So these are some typical expressions we might use with children. Guess the word from the picture. What word do you think would make sense? Guess the word from word shape. Go on and read the sentence, go back and guess what would make sense. That would be a context cue. Guess the word from the initial letter or letters. Does the word that you guessed fit with the first letters? Now, in great contrast, in England now, this is the official guidance. Children should not be expected to use strategies such as whole word recognition and or cues from context, grammar or pictures. Phonic work is seen not as one of a range of optional methods or strategies for teaching reading, but as a body of knowledge and skills about how the alphabet works, which all children should be taught. This is not the same guidance as many teachers receive in other countries and contexts, which is very worrying, as this guidance is based on the findings of many decades of research on reading. This is a printable diagram of the simple view of reading, and I've mirrored that in the simple view of writing, and you can find the simple view of reading one in your course notes, and here's a link for both. This is invaluable for your professional knowledge and understanding. And it's a fantastic diagram for reflecting on each learner's reading profile or writing profile on a named and dated copy and revisiting periodically. So please do take the time out looking at this in more detail for you to do. These are the kind of things that we can consider when reflecting on learners' reading profiles. As you can see with having these two axes, we get 4 quadrants. And each quadrant we get a description that might broadly fit a child's reading profile. From that we can plot where children are, and we can ask ourselves questions or have theories about why they might be there and is there something we can do about it. Also over time their reading profiles will change, and we as teachers we can be proactive in doing that. Now I want to talk about multilingual contexts. It is the same alphabetic code knowledge and the same core skills and their sub-skills which we need, that they need to be taught regardless of the current spoken language or languages of the pupil, the level of language comprehension in English of the pupil, the age of the pupil, the stage of learning, the capacity for new learning, the time and frequency allocated to phonics teaching, and the time allocated for English speaking teaching for their language comprehension. You don't need something different for pupils who are in different sets of circumstances or with different languages. The phonics teaching can be taught in any circumstances in a systematic order. It may be slower or quicker, but so be it. It's still the same code and phonics skills that need to be taught. Now, teachers need to support and teach the spoken English as much as required as part of the phonics teaching and in addition to the phonics teaching. Use mother tongue to support in English lessons as necessary or if possible, but sometimes the teacher of English does not speak the mother tongue, so it really is dependent on the circumstances. Again, in multilingual contexts, a main alphabetic code chart will support the systematic teaching and the incidental phonics teaching in the wider curriculum as required, and I'm going to be referring a lot to the role and helpfulness of alphabetic code charts. And teachers can also teach phonics across the wider curriculum incidentally, according to the learner's needs. For example, in a bilingual context where half of the curriculum maybe is taught in English. And this additional teaching is limited only by the level of phonics professional knowledge of the teachers themselves. When it comes to teaching English as an additional language, we have to be wary and cautious of some of the material made specifically for EAL provision. And that's because if you look closely, you may find that the level of the print for the reading and requests for writing are far more challenging than the level of the phonics being interspersed in the program. And so really you have a mix of whole language and phonics. So you need to watch out for a mismatch of approaches in published material. However, sometimes that material is very high quality and provides lots of rich illustrations. So if this is the case, consider adapting the printed content and activities of the material to a focus on spoken language comprehension, in which case the teacher reads the material that's really above what the child can be expected to read. Now, dependent on your context, you need to decide what is appropriate for your pupils regarding the language support in the mother tongue, or if they're young enough or no alternative, immersion in English for the youngest, or if necessary. Allocate time to phonics, but also masses of time to the spoken language teaching. For example, through common greetings and typical themes according to your school's or country's priorities. Let's have a look at what this provision can be. I talk about it as being parallel provision for EAL or English as an additional language literacy. So if you look on the left, we're focusing on speaking and listening. So for language comprehension, there's no restrictions regarding any speech or any sounds within the speech. There's no reading or writing involved at first, other than maybe the teacher models some to give an impression of what it's like. And the focus is on speech, spoken language, common greetings, appropriate themes, things like self, family, body, places, numbers, colours, and so on. At the same time, or in parallel, for reading, spelling and writing, that's when you provide your systematic synthetic phonics programme. You need to understand, and the children do, that teaching is alphabetic code knowledge and the technical skills of decoding, encoding and handwriting. So code, reading, spelling and writing is cumulative. That means you're building it up all of the time and providing things that match the code you've taught. Select a limited number of specific words from your resources for some vocabulary and language comprehension. Focus on small code steps and skills, because really what you're doing is tuning the children's ear to the sounds of English speech and articulating those sounds. And some of those sounds, at least, may not be in their mother tongue at all. Accept limited comprehension of the cumulative phonics material at first. Now let's look at this as for a practical example. This is an activity sheet, and it practices the code and word level skills. So it's a word level material. So learners can decode all the cumulative words in the word bank. That's a technical phonics skill. So they're practicing the sounding out and blending. But if English is a new language, just select a limited number of those printed words for suitable new vocabulary. For example, you might pick rain. Sketch a picture of rain above the printed word to help with understanding the meaning. The pictures provide support for the vocabulary enrichment in English. Now, when you use this resource with English speakers, the children will already know a lot of these words and they will identify one or two that they don't think they understand. But if the children have English as an additional language, you can use the same resource. They get plenty of practice at code level and decoding and articulating those sounds. And then for vocabulary or meaning making, just pick one or two words that are useful or simple to illustrate or to act out. So what we're really talking about now is that within your phonics provision, it's really helpful to have very high picture content and lots of drawing activities. So throughout all my phonics work and phonics programs, children are heavily involved in doing their own drawings and actually teachers doing little sketches to model how to draw things. So this is a route to helping language comprehension and vocabulary enrichment. So again, you can see here lots and lots of code and word level, text level material, but with lots of picture content to enhance learning. Then we go on, we need to apply and extend code and word level work to actual sentences and texts. So again, learners who have English as an additional language can still recognise the code, sound out and blend the words, articulate them and say them. Yes, you may as a teacher need to help with some pronunciation or some expression and the rhythm and the lilt of English. But then after that, you can work on what do these sentences mean? What do these texts mean? Which again will involve lots of drawing. You might have reference books to help with those illustrations and explanations and lots of acting out. So with this parallel provision for English as an additional language, for speaking and listening along with reading, spelling and writing, this is the approach. The separate language comprehension provision and the systematic synthetic phonics provision will complement one another, and eventually there will be increasing comprehension in the phonics sessions, and reading and writing can be introduced in the language comprehension sessions when understanding of the alphabetic code and phonics skills have been well established. Eventually, in the language comprehension sessions, you can then include incidental phonics for reading and writing as appropriate. So again, the programs I'm involved with are very content rich, and this includes the illustrations to support and expand the language comprehension. So here you've got a few examples from the Oxford Reading Tree Floppy's phonics program, and also a few examples from the Phonics International program. So I wrote Phonics International first, and in effect it was the mother of Floppy's phonics because ideas and core resources that I knew we needed for phonics provision went into the design of Floppy's phonics. So Floppy's phonics has exceptional provision for language development as well as phonics content. It has an online interactive subscription platform accessible for use in the home as well as school. And actually this is something I'm passionate about. So part of the design of all my work is on the basis that not only can you use it in schools or with tutors, but it can then be tangible on paper or in books to go and inform home as well. There's a fantastic range of quality illustrations throughout the digital resource and the hard copy little Floppy's Phonics Sounds books. So here are some very few examples. In fact, it's really hard to put across just how illustration rich Floppy's Phonics is. So at the beginning you have all of this material, and we haven't even started introducing letter shapes yet. So this is not phonics at this time. It really is all about speaking and listening and developing actual conversations. And then we start to introduce the letter shapes. So although there are 48 Floppy's Phonics Sounds books in all, the numbering of the books actually starts when the letter shapes are introduced. So that becomes book 1. So there are 36 numbered books when we have actual phonics provision. Here are some more examples of illustrations. This is something that I've really wanted to do, and actually said to Oxford University Press, how can we really show people the wealth of content in Floppy's phonics? So this is a little snapshot. So you can see here illustrations that are both on the online interactive subscription platform and in the little glossy books. And these illustrations are used for developing language comprehension and then introducing the focused sound and the focused letter sound correspondence in the context of actual scenes and themes. This is a reflection of inside the little glossy Floppy's Phonics Sounds books. The pictures top right are mirrored on the interactive platform. And then at the end of each book, and each book chunks the code, you have additional material, and those end pages are not on the digital resources. Right, let's summarise where we are then with English as an additional language with regard to the diagram of the simple view of reading. So I haven't got time now to read all of this out, but you can revisit this slide and see how each quadrant fits where your children are. So from this, you are able to plot where children are and what their reading profile is and what you need to do about it. So this is the same thing. You can see that children with weak phonics and strong language will be in that top left quadrant. If they've actually got strong phonics but have weak language in terms of the spoken English language, they'll be in that bottom right quadrant. But ultimately, we're aiming for all of the children to be in that top right quadrant. And to do that, we can be supported for teaching and learning with very strong phonics provision, with language and cumulative texts within the phonics programme, but in addition, strong oral language practice and wider literature experience. And in a sense, that is no different from children who already speak English, except it's a much, much bigger challenge with children who haven't got English as that spoken language, which is why I'm really emphasising the value of the strong oral component. Right, when I refer to systematic synthetic phonics, you might not know what I mean or what that looks like. And bear in mind, we are talking about phonics programs and provision all around the world, and so they may have many differences. In fact, they do have differences. So I'm going to talk now about the synthetic phonics teaching principles, broadly speaking as understood in England's context. Now, to synthesize means to blend. So strictly speaking, this is referring to the decoding or the reading process where we teach children to sound out and blend printed words. But the synthetic phonics teaching principles include both synthesizing for decoding and oral segmenting or splitting up the sounds in a spoken word for encoding and spelling, for which you need to allot letters for the identified sounds. Now, spelling is a fantastic thing. It's really hard to spell in the English language because of the complexity of the code, but it's very exciting because we're actually teaching spelling explicitly from the outset within the phonics programme. And over time, really the phonics becomes not just about teaching reading and spelling, it sort of shifts over to a spelling programme. And I think that we need to put plenty of emphasis on building up knowledge of spelling word banks. That means words we can associate together that are spelt with the same letter sound correspondences or the same bits of code. So the synthetic phonics teaching principles then are broken up into knowledge and skills. So we're teaching the knowledge of the alphabetic code, which means the letter sound correspondences, the links between them. We teach the code incrementally or systematically. And we're teaching that the code is reversible. So by that we mean we go from print to sound for reading and sound to print for spelling purposes. So the way I put it across is that we have 3 core phonics skills, but we need to understand what the sub-skills are of those core phonics skills. So I'll talk about those in a minute. So the core skills are 1. Sounding out and blending printed words for reading. 2. Orally segmenting or splitting up spoken words for spelling, then allotting graphemes, and a grapheme is a letter or a letter group for the identified sounds. And then 3, importantly, handwriting all the letters and letter groups linked to sounds at first, not letter names. Now I've added in the handwriting component because research has shown us how important and how effective it is to actually learn the code through forming the letter shapes. Now these are some of the phonics sub-skills. So let's think about reading first of all. So one of the sub-skills involves no print. It's oral blending, and that's when you are tuning children's ear to discern a spoken word from its component parts. So you might provide cake, and you're tuning their ear to be able to discern the word cake. With print, that's where we show letters and letter groups and we flash them up maybe on flashcards, so see the letters and say the sounds. So you're teaching the code to automaticity. Spelling sub-skills. First of all, oral segmenting with no print. This time we start with the whole spoken word, said slowly and naturally, coat, and model how we can split that up into its component phonemes or the smallest sounds. So it's coat, k-o-t. And again, that's about lots of practice and lots of tuning children's ear into those sounds. That is about phonemic awareness. Now, taking it further to a full spelling process, so with print, sub-skill is hear the sounds, so the teacher or the adult or the parent generates the sounds. You might go shh, and then children can perhaps air write the code for that, or they can point to or select grapheme tiles, or write the letter and letter groups on paper. That's the sub-skill of spelling. Now with handwriting, it's really complex and people underestimate this or don't teach handwriting well. So it's about children being able to recognise the letter shapes linked to sounds, but they have to recognise capital letters as well as the lowercase because the capital letters are the same code as the lowercase letters. The children can match capital and lowercase in pairs. They need to know the orientation of the letter shape and then how to form it with direction, the position the letter shapes sit on a writing line, and how to hold a pencil correctly with a tripod grip and how to write on that writing line and think about the posture. Now all of that's quite a big ask. Then again within the synthetic phonics teaching principles we've had teach the knowledge and skills we're now going to apply. So the application is apply the growing code knowledge and all the phonics sub-skills and skills to cumulative words, sentences and texts. My suggestion is that when a lot of those are without the picture cues, it really means the children have to apply themselves, not distracted by pictures, not guessing, but then they become the illustrators to engage them with the learning and with the meaning making. So in my programs there is drawing throughout for both teachers and the children. Then part of the application is to reading with cumulative decodable reading books as independently as possible to build up their confidence and fluency. So it's no good giving the children to read by themselves books with lots of coding that they don't know, because they're just going to struggle or word guess or feel really bad that they can't read. So it's an important move, and it's actually an official guidance in England now that beginners and strugglers are provided with books that they can read when asked to read independently. Then the application begins to be across the wider curriculum when reading and writing with support, and the teacher can teach phonics incidentally as required. Now, all of those teaching principles are in the context of avoiding multi-cueing reading strategies which amount to guessing the words. So if you remember, that is guessing from the picture, guess from the first letters, guess from the word shape, guess from the context. However, the pictures and the context are used for supporting comprehension or meaning making. So we don't demonize illustrations and context, but it's us as teachers appreciating that we really need to be able to equip children with the code technicalities and skills to read the printed words effortlessly or to spell them, but we can still steep them in rich illustrations and themes in actual reading material. So the connection then between language and literature. The experience of literature or books underpins both the word recognition practice and the language comprehension processes. Now, literature or books provide vocabulary enrichment far beyond the level of daily speech. So it's essential that children can readily decode new words and pronounce them. And when they can't pronounce them correctly, don't forget that you're there as an adult to help them with that. Knowledge of the world and a rich spoken vocabulary is hugely important for underpinning reading ability, and this is called cultural capital or literacy capital. And it's going to be that aspect of the English language that teachers of children for whom it's a new language or an additional language are going to have to remember to provide, as well as the phonics programme. So a content-rich systematic synthetic phonics programme can or should provide great opportunities for vocabulary enrichment and language comprehension development, and in my view, with permanent, tangible materials. The programme can provide opportunities for teaching and reinforcing grammar alongside, although I have to say that my phonics programmes are not formal planned grammar programmes. They're very much on phonics provision and spoken language within that. And it should also be a spelling programme and continue throughout primary as required. Now, when schools or teachers are evaluating a phonics programme, they need to consider these factors in making their choice. And then it's how to use that, because in effect a content-rich programme can be a huge body of material. So part of the resource design and the guidance for teachers is how simple and practical it is to deliver. So when I've gone on to design resources and programmes, I've thought about simple resource preparation and use and routines, and that the resources have built-in differentiation from the outset. For example, there are shorter and longer words and different ways of using the resources and supporting the pupils with the same resource. And pupils engage with their own materials and learning. So do they know the letter sound correspondences? Can they blend and spell the words? Do they know meanings of words and concepts? And part of the training or the teacher training is about children being able to mark their own work, tick it, if they think they know it confidently, circle things they don't know, and from the outset they understand that it's absolutely okay not to know something because they're just the learner, and it's the teacher's responsibility to help them with that, to teach them again or give them more practice. So in this very complex alphabetic code, the teacher is taking responsibility from the outset to engage learners fully and make it clear that it's okay not to know something. Now, as part of your teaching, you can engage the children with the history of the English language to describe why there is such a complex written code. And the history and the notion of codes are both very interesting. Now, I've flagged up this particular book because it's the most fantastic book in terms of illustrations. In fact, there's a whole series of this type of book where you can go through the book and it takes you over, this particular one, 12,000 years of the same venue. So it's illustrating how different people have come from different countries to England and brought their own languages and how things have changed over time. So that's not about phonics as such, but it's just a lovely historical book. And then the notion of codes is very important. So you can talk to children about different symbols and signs, and that the human species likes to illustrate things with symbols and signs. Now, by having alphabetic code charts, we are making that English alphabetic code really tangible. So what does tangible mean, and why is it so important? It means we're giving it a physical existence. So it becomes capable of being seen, touched and referred to. And we also provide an audio version which can be heard. So it's capable of being clearly grasped by the mind. And in my opinion, that's the starting point of a phonics program or phonics provision or phonics training. Then we also, for part of our evaluation, need to be able to understand the notion of the maths of the phonics. So that means we need to be able to look at the experience of every child to see what practice they get and what's really happening. So it's not about phonics which is entertaining, or what I call pink and fluffy phonics. It's about, in reality, how much practice is the child getting. So what does routine, revision and new practice consist of? You can quantify the code practiced, the number of new words read for decoding, spelt for encoding, and the amount of incorporated handwriting practice linked to sounds. You can think about time spent on new vocabulary explained, homophones explained, any grammar as arises, application and extension to reading, spelling, writing, new cumulative material, and time spent building up knowledge of spelling word banks and reading decodable books. That's a lot of content. And I think that we have to put some new thinking into our phonics provision. Because at the moment, it's very much people talk about phonics first fast or phonics first fast and only. And I'm going to say that when you give a lot of rich content, we don't need to, or we can't plough through introducing the code as fast as people might think. Now, the teaching and learning cycle is a really helpful notion for our phonics provision. So here we've got one that allows us to reflect on our content. There's certain language that we might use as phonics teachers. We talk about revisit and review at the beginning of every lesson, so that's looking at old learning. Then we've got teacher-led, when we will introduce the next bit of code or the next letter sound correspondence. And then we've got pupil practice at code and word level. And don't forget, that's for reading, spelling and writing and meaning making, or it can include that. And then we've got apply and extend. So we're talking about then going on to sentences and text and meaning making. And also we need to think about spelling word banks and then practice of reading actual books. That is a lot. And to suggest that that teaching and learning cycle for a piece of code can take place in 20 minutes or 30 minutes or in one session is highly impractical. So what I suggest is always complete the cycle of whatever content's provided in your phonics program, even if it takes more than one session, because it's such essential practice. So don't be in a hurry to get through the code. Just make sure the children get really content-rich practice. Now, this notion of a teaching and learning cycle I've taken into all my phonics programs. So you can see some examples here of how various resources support all of these elements. And in Phonics International, it's got such a comprehensive range of resources. You don't have to use all of them. So on the website, you need to go and see what the teacher guidance is to highlight the core and essential resources rather than feel overwhelmed. And here we have the same notion, the teaching and learning cycle or sequence for Floppy's Phonics, showing how there are resources provided for each element of the sequence, and that includes a combination of hard copy material, the digital online platform which is interactive, and also paper-based material for the children to work on. And then No Nonsense Phonics Skills is a series of 9 pupil books, which is much more linear in its design to be easier to pick up and go with. It's published by Raintree, but it's actually some of Phonics International core material, which has been developed. And if people like that issue of much simpler and ready-made, they can go to phonicsintervention.org for some free training material. So again, this is No Nonsense Phonics Skills, which has a starter kit. And then there's a series of 8 eBooks, which consists of, again, some Phonics International material, which I've compiled together to make it easier to use as a pick up and go series. And we've provided this as a free body of work, which might be particularly helpful for tutors or parents at home. And now we're going to think about terminology. So we're going to think what the difference is between phonetics and phonics. This alphabetic code chart is just one of many versions that we provide as free printable charts for different users and uses. So one chart might not be suitable for all of the people who want to use it. So you can go to that site to have a look at the range there. And on this little chart, I've done 2 things. I have used the notation for the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is black writing in the slash marks. But then I've also used what I call easy to use symbols, vowel sounds denoted in red with slash marks, consonant sounds denoted in blue in the slash marks. And we're going to talk about the difference between phonetics and phonics. Now, phonetics is the science concerned with the study of speech processes, including the production, perception, and analysis of precise speech sounds. And that's where we get the use of the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. Now, phonics, however, is a practical method of teaching people to read and spell by training them to associate letters and letter groups with their phonetic values. And actually, this is something that we have for lifelong reading and spelling of new and challenging words, but many people who are literate don't even realise that. Now, phonics is not as scientific, so there's lots of sensible, practical approaches. And when I use the easy-to-use symbols on the alphabetic code chart, it means that you can, as a teacher or a parent, put your own regional pronunciation or accent onto the sounds. Whereas IPA symbols are very precise, and so there's more flexibility when we start to use just letters and letter groups within the slash marks to denote the sounds. We also need a change in perception of phonics, because many people, including teachers and pupils, think of phonics only as a teaching method for infants. And that perception really needs to change, because as I've said, it's something that we use as lifelong adults, but often don't even realise. And so what do you do to spell new or longer words? What is your spelling process or skill? So if I gave you a word to spell that you've never heard before, I think you would find that in order to be able to write it down, you'll think in sounds. So if it's a longer multisyllable word, you might chunk it and think of those chunks and write each chunk, but it's still a form of phonics, even if you do syllable chunking. And then we often think that we spell in letter names, but we only use letter names to relay a precise or correct spelling from one person to another. But if as teachers we don't make it explicit to children that actually our process is more likely to be thinking in sounds, whether we write or type out a longer spelling, than it is in letter names. So I want you to try that out for yourself and think to yourself, when you spell a new word, how do you do it? And then tell the children that actually phonics for spelling is an adult skill. Now, on the count of 3, read these words aloud. 1, 2, 3. Now, the chances are high that you hadn't seen those words in print before or even spoken them, but you've probably come up with a pronunciation for those 2 words. You might have guessed or deduced that they're actually a plant. It's the Latin plant name. But what you will have done to come up with a spoken word is you will have peeled off the sounds from beginning of the word to the end. You might have chunked it. You might have glanced at the words first and you saw area or aria or folia, so that you found it easier to come up with a pronunciation, but that's still a form of phonics. So when you read new words in literature, it is most likely to be phonics that you're using to come up with a pronunciation. But here is the complication, because very often when we encounter longer, challenging or technical words in literature, We don't even bother to come up with a pronunciation. We skip the words. Now, as literate adults, if we needed to pronounce them, we could. But if we don't teach children phonics really well, you might find that children do a lot of word skipping as they get older and the text and the words become more challenging. And they can still deduce the meaning of the text or get the gist of the texts. But they can't add to their spoken language if they're not equipped to come up with a pronunciation or if they tend to do a lot of word skipping. So I'm going to suggest that, unbeknown to a lot of teachers, young people as they go through the school system do a lot of word skipping. I explain about it on this slide, which you can revisit if you want to, or stop the webinar to read that through. So, do you always decode new words? How often and why do you think many children skip the reading of printed words? And what does this suggest for our teaching of younger and older pupils? Discuss. And I do think that's worth discussing. It also shows that phonics is not just about infant teaching. We need to all be good teachers of phonics, including as children get older, whether English is the main or additional language. Okay, it's common for sometimes us as adults or competent readers and sometimes children to skip those words. What can we do? We need lots of opportunities for reading aloud, and we need to engage with pupils and their parents about the importance of reading aloud at home, accurate reading, not guessing or skipping words, and being curious about the meaning of each word. And as teachers, we need to avoid teaching or promoting by default the multi-cueing, guessing word strategies. Then this perception. What do you think children think? Do you think they think phonics is baby stuff or adult stuff? If they get intervention in a phonics program as they're older, do you think they think that's adult stuff? I think they think it's baby stuff, but I think so many teachers and other people think phonics is baby stuff. And I suggest we need to change that perception. And I really have said for a long time that all teachers should be trained in phonics and teaching or remediating reading. Now, generally speaking, when we introduce the alphabetic code in systematic synthetic phonics, we start with a simple version of the code at first. And by that I mean we introduce all of the sounds, but only one spelling for those sounds, or mainly one spelling. Then when we've gone to all the sounds and mainly one spelling, we branch out and we revisit the sounds and we introduce the spelling alternatives. Now, my suggestion for phonics is a two-pronged approach, and it's supported by the ever-present Alphabetic Code Chart. So yes, we still have a systematic, planned, incremental phonics program, but in addition, as teachers, we provide phonics instruction incidentally for an individual if necessary, or a group or a whole class as needed, whether it's in the phonics lesson and it just evolves that way, or whether it's in the wider curriculum. Now, I've got various top tips for incidental phonics teaching, which you can access via that link, and we've also put those in the course notes on pages 10 to 12. Okay, so we've established that the English alphabetic code is complex. Tell the children it's actually the most complex alphabetic code in the world. What is it? It's allotting letter symbols for the discrete sounds of speech. That's the basis for creating a written code, enabling us to communicate through writing. And when we translate the letter symbols into sounds, that is the basis for reading. We can show this visually on a chart. So let's have a look at the design of my charts. So basically speaking, I recommend that we always put the sounds or denote the sounds down the columns because they come to an end point and there are far fewer sounds than there are spelling alternatives. And then we put the graphemes, which means the letter or the letter groups or the spelling alternatives, across the rows. Now, is the alphabetic code chart too complex to use from the beginning? Yes, it is. You're not just showing the children that chart saying, right, you understand about this chart, but you start to model, and in the very first lesson you can point to the sound and tell them about the slash marks denoting the sound, and you point to the letter shape S that you're beginning to teach them and say, today children, I'm going to teach you this. And each day you look at what you've taught and you point to the next bit that you're going to teach. And in this way the children start to assimilate the rationale, adjust to the lesson routines, and increasingly absorb the information. And it enables some children to self-teach. But ironically, having the alphabetic code chart itself is also training the adult and supporting the adult in the provision of the phonics. So it's a multifaceted purpose for that chart. And if we send a version home as well, it's informing the parents at home. Now, the alphabetic code is reversible, and this is very, very important understanding. For reading, we start with print and decode to sound. For spelling and writing, we start with sound and encode to print. Now, sometimes phonics practice or phonics programs conflate those things, and they do model lessons where they're kind of muddling up whether they're teaching reading or spelling. I drew up this graphic to try to unpick the core phonics skills and their sub-skills. So starting off in the centre, we have the pink circle, which is describing the actual code knowledge, the letter sound correspondences. And then moving out from the circle in the direction of the points of the triangle, we've got the sub-skills of the core skills. On the points of the triangle, we've got the core skills. Now, this is a superb diagram to show just what it is that you are teaching in your phonics provision. And actually, the bottom left of the graphic, focusing on the third core skill of handwriting, is also introducing that we're introducing the alphabet as well. So we're teaching the alphabetic code, we're teaching about the alphabet, and teachers need to know how to do that. So this diagram is important for professional knowledge, but you can use the same diagram for individual pupil assessment. So you name and date it, and you look at those features on there, and you can tick or highlight what they do know, what they don't know, to then think, well, what do you need to focus on for that particular child? So I wouldn't recommend doing that for every child. I would recommend that doing for the children who seem to struggle the most. Then we have various hand routines for this reversible code, and I see a huge amount of variation, not only from school to school, but sometimes in class to class. So I think it's very important that for beginners, we're very good at this. So we need to avoid muddlement. What do we do with our hands? It's very, very simple. When we're doing blending, so we're working from print, we just point a finger and track under the letters and letter groups all through the printed words. And I've got detailed notes for the phonics routines in your course notes from pages 15 to 19. For oral segmenting or spelling, we always use the left hand, palm facing, and tally the sounds identified to thumb and fingers of the left hand. And it doesn't matter whether the adult or the children are right-handed or left-handed, always use the left hand, because by looking at the palm and starting with your thumb, what you're doing is you're tallying to make sure it's working from left to right when we spell, because that's how English writing works, from left to right. So we're identifying the sounds beginning to end, but left to right. Now, it's very common to see children being taught to sound out and blend the print with the adult modelling some form of tallying, and that is wrong. We do not need to count sounds or tally sounds when we read. The counting and tallying sounds is for the spelling process. So remember, for reading, it's just the pointing and tracking that we need to do. This is a detail of how we do the decoding. So before we start to sound out and blend, we need to look at the printed word to see if we recognise any letter groups. And that's why we teach letters and letter groups on flashcards, to get children to be able to recognise those letter groups. So you finger track under each grapheme, letter or letter group, from left to right while saying the sound, and then run your finger right under the whole printed word from left to right when you say the whole word. So you look at it first, you recognise the CK together as K, and you go st, ick, stick, and that's it. And spelling with editing, face the same way as the learners, so don't face onto the learners, turn the same way they're facing, so that when you model with your left hand palm facing, they can see you're looking at your palm and they are looking at your palm. Whereas if you try and do things like that with your hand when facing them, the children themselves are going to turn their fist out and work from right to left instead of left to right. So focus on those routines after you've watched the webinar. So you say the word to be spelt very slowly and the individual sounds will sort of pop out. Tally each sound onto thumb and fingers and then repeat each sound separately, clearly, and then count how many sounds. So then you model how to write the sound dashes top left of your whiteboard from left to right. Keep your whiteboard clean and clear like a page. So don't have lots of junk around your whiteboard or use a flip chart. The sound dashes double up as writing lines, which means that when you go to model the writing, you're doing it correctly and you're not just doing letters floating in the air. And then sound out and blend to check the word, and then the learner can tick the word only when it's spelt correctly. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So here we've gone soap, soap, 3 sounds. The teacher's drawn 3 sound dashes, make them long with small spaces in between, and then interactively ask the children to repeat the sounds, and as they repeat the sounds you can write the bits on the sound dashes, then check, and the children can again call out to help you check soap, soap, and then tick it, and then you can draw a long line and rewrite the whole word whilst you say the sounds. Now I've got posters for all these different things on the free CPD resources page at phonicsinternational.com. And I've also got them at floppysphonics.com. And you can tell the parents about this because they can print them off as well. Now, the smallest speech sounds with any spoken word we refer to as phonemes. And generally speaking, phoneme can be identified as the sound that can change the meaning of the word. So if you look at boat and go and coat, we've got b-oat and k-oat. And the meaning is changed by the b and by the k. So we know they are phonemes. We use slash marks to denote when we mean the sounds. So we can hear the sound a, as in apple, and to tell the children about the slash marks, that when we point to those or refer to those, we mean the sounds, not the spelling. And don't avoid the use of those slash marks, because as the code gets more and more complex, believe you me, there's a real muddle between do you mean a sound or do you mean a spelling? So use the slash marks for your sounds. Now, the only caveat about this is that when you identify the sounds for spelling, so you're modelling it for the children, so say we're going to spell clown, k-l-ow-n, k-l-ow-n, and you can identify those sounds. Don't write the sounds as the sounds notation. Go straight to writing it with the proper letters and letter groups, because you can see that the sounds notation is not appropriate to use for the spelling process. So use the proper spellings. And do you know how many vowel sounds we can identify in the English language? Very often people say 5. And it's because they're thinking of the 5 vowel letters of the alphabet. Well, the English language has got far more than that. Let's compare the alphabetic code of the English language, which is very tricky. It's called a complex or an opaque code, with the Spanish language. So in English, we've got around 44 sounds and many spelling alternatives. In Spanish, we've got around 24 sounds and very few spelling alternatives. So we might call the Spanish alphabetic code simple or transparent. So as you can imagine, it's much easier for the teacher in Spain teaching a child to read in Spanish than it is for a teacher trying to teach the English language. This is how many vowel sounds we have in English. And it's a lot more than 5, as you can see. So I'm going to do this very quickly, but I've got other material where we can go through the sounds again. So basically, I want you to listen to volume and pitch for these vowel sounds. A, E, I, O, A, E, I, O, U, R, O, E, oi, ow, oo, you, your. Monotone, quite deep, quite loud. Bear that in mind for the sounds of speech. Now, let's go to the word soap again. When we do soap, right, soap, we have two consonant sounds and a vowel sound, and they are very different in pitch and volume. So when you get good at teaching phonics, this is the way you need to think about it. So in soap, we've got S-O-P. These two consonant sounds are really very quiet. The pitch is really very, very high, and if children have got hearing difficulties or glue ear or the room is noisy, you're going to end up saying S, but it's not, it's S-O. So the pitch of the vowel sound is low and loud, and then the P is just a little explosion. So very, very different, and it really is helpful to try to get good at saying sounds as purely as you can. Now, it's not as easy to say consonant sounds as it is to say vowel sounds, because you end up putting that on them. Some are easy to say, like S, but some, like B, it's hard to not put an on. Now, when I say these sounds, which may not be perfect by some people's definition, I want you to just think about the variation in volume and in pitch. S, t, p, n, k, r, m, d, g, l, f, b, j, y, u, z, n, v, ch, sh, v, f, j, x, g, l, n, k, qu, ch. Quite a variation compared to vowel sounds. Now this is so very interesting because look at this. If you look at the bottom, these are all graphemes which are code for vowel sounds. But hang on a minute, because they include vowel letters and consonant letters. This is why you can never talk about just the vowels or the consonants. You have to clarify, do you mean vowel sounds or vowel letters? Consonant sounds or consonant letters? So when you get into the technicalities of phonics and provision, you need to, as a teacher, understand these things. Now, I've introduced the notion of combined units of sounds or combined phonemes. So I want you to look at an alphabetic code chart and count how many sounds you can see, or units of sound, which are the elements which are got yellow behind them and they're in slash marks. If you count those, you will find on this particular chart that there are around 51, because some units of sound that we teach have to be more than one phoneme. So here are some examples. So take the letter X in fox. It's code for two sounds in fox. X, k, s. Take the letter X in exam. That's code for two sounds. G, z, g, z. And so when we take the actual spelling or the print into account, although we've only got around 44 phonemes in the English spoken language, in terms of teaching the code, we have to teach more units of sound than pure phonemes. So phonics is mainly at the phoneme level, but with some bits that have to be taught as combined phonemes. However, my work is, generally speaking, avoiding teaching multiple sound units, which are called consonant clusters or adjacent consonants. So we don't teach or introduce as if they are a unit or like on a card, sp, cr, str, ulk, nt. And we don't do onset and rhyme like br, ik, sl, ak, tr, uk, cl, ok, p, ek, as that complicates the phonics and makes unnecessary teaching and learning. And then you may come to words which haven't got the code on the alphabetic code chart, in which case you can study them, you can maybe add that bit of code on the chart, or you can make a little poster. And so generally speaking, I suggest that any handmade posters you need to make, you can put the sound in the slash marks on the top left, then write the focus grapheme, and then write the word and any other words that are spelt with that bit of code. And because it's an unusual piece of code, there won't be many words. So summarising then how the three concepts of the English alphabetic code, or the complexities, one sound can be represented by 1, 2, 3 or 4 letters. One sound can be represented by more than one spelling alternative, sometimes many. And one grapheme, that is a letter or letter group, can have different pronunciations. So EAR, as code for R in heart, is the rare one, and you may need to make your own handmade poster as required. So basically speaking, I promote terminology based on the alphabetic code using the language of the code, because letters don't make a sound or say a sound, and they are code for the sounds. And when you start off with that kind of language, it serves older children and adults as well. And it is what it is, and it's actually quite fun saying to children, right, we're going to learn this code. I provide this wording as well, so if you look at your course notes on page 18, you have an example of a printed word with very unusual code in it, the word straight, and you can just say, in this word, these letters are code for A, and provide the sound. And as phonics teachers, you're often saying, in this word, in these words, in some words, in a few words, in most words, in all words. So you're grouping and clarifying where the code belongs. This is also a very, very handy little poster to help you with continuous support for spelling. So this could be in the wider curriculum at any point in a children's schooling. Let me help you to spell that tricky or unusual or interesting word. What sounds can we hear all through the word? Let's find the sound on our chart, and let's find another example of how we spell that. So you might find that helpful. So on an alphabetic code chart, looking at the different designs, this one here, for example, has got the colour coding of the Phonics International Programme's 12 units of work. So there's Unit 1 in that colour, and you go to a page and you find all the resources for Unit 1, and Unit 2, and Unit 3, Unit 4, Unit 5, Unit 6, and so on. Although the colours themselves, you don't have to use it with Phonics International because it's a nice way of breaking up the code into little memorable bits. So you've got various versions. You've got one here for a student teacher's chart. You've got little alphabet mini charts. You've got giant charts, which are printable already made, and you've got a tracking chart. The Floppy's Phonics program has got a giant chart and mini charts. And the No Nonsense Phonics Skills series, which comes from Phonics International, has got a big printable giant chart and ready-made little charts, mini charts, tabletops, and it has other printable resources on a USB stick. And in the pupil books, in No Nonsense Phonics Skills, it builds up the chart from the beginning, so we add more and more bits of code as we go through the books. And then I have an approach for nursery children, which is also two-pronged. But this time we're introducing just the alphabet letters, so not letter combinations, but we're introducing the alphabet letters linked to their sounds, and we're modelling the phonics skills and sub-skills. So my ethos for that is exposure and experience and no expectation for the littlies in their learning. Now that doesn't mean low expectation, it means no expectation in the sense that if children are ready to learn these things and they get good exposure, they will start to pick them up. And this is something that you can do prior to a systematic synthetic phonics program. So in these two phonics and talk time books, we've got phonics introduced with the alphabet letters, and we've also got pages which focus on speaking and listening. First of all, to just talk about the picture, and then to do some little phonics activities with those pictures. And this is cumulative and systematic. We're introducing capital letters as code for the same sound as the lowercase, and we do that through little characters. So Anna, her name has got a capital letter to explain when we can use capital letters, and she's eating an apple where we use lowercase letters. We've also got a wide range of resources called Teeny Reading Seeds resources based on phonics and alphabet letters, which can provide incidental experience. And both of these bodies of resources are now free at this website here. And even for the littlies, if you've got letter groups in their name or anything you're reading, you can explain about letter groups as needed. Now, the letters and the letter groups in printed form prompt the reader to say the sounds. So in my work, you won't find sound buttons because the letters, in effect, are the sound buttons. And we teach children as separate letters and letter groups so that in a printed word, they can seek out the letter group. What makes it really complicated is we don't just have spelling alternatives, we have pronunciation alternatives. Let me give you a simple example. Let's take letter A. It can be pronounced A as in apple, A as in angel, R as in father, O as in want, E as in any, and schwa as in about. Now there's no way you can expect your average teacher to create or provide the range of resources that you can do in a really well thought through phonics program. It doesn't mean that teacher can't do a good job or do some teaching, but I'm just saying teachers should not be expected to come up with these things themselves. It's become a specialism for someone like me. Now in my phonics programs there's a mnemonic system. A mnemonic system is an aid to memory. And for this, I've got key example words and pictures, and they work for both prompting the sounds at first and for exemplifying the spelling alternatives. Let's take this mnemonic system here. So the picture and the word kit, say it slowly. Kit. You're already producing the k sound by how slowly you say the word. So you tell the child what the word is. This is a kit. Say it slowly. And you can feel and hear that first sound. But if you put the printed word, it only exemplifies the letter K as code for the k sound. So you also need further key picture words, for example, cat and duck. So throughout all of the phonics programs, you've got that very simple and very memorable mnemonic system. Now at first, that picture is focused on the first sound of the word kit. But when you look at your alphabetic code chart, when you get to the word kettle, the U, the LE at the end is an N sound. So you can't always have a key picture word for the beginning sound because in the complex English alphabetic code, the position in words also influences what that code is. So again, all of these things are provided for you in the actual bodies of work. Now, when you get something like these Say the Sounds posters, which are a fantastic resource, you can use them in both directions. You can point under the letters and letter groups and say the sounds, which is a sub-skill of reading. But if you do it in reverse, you need those key picture words. So, for example, if I said, right, point to the k, which one would you point to? So you need to be able to say to children, point to the k as in duck, or the k as in kit. So there's a real dance between teaching reading and teaching spelling throughout this work. Then I heavily promote the need for some paper-based core resources, and that these belong to the learner and they are collated or collected in the phonics folder for every learner. So if you go to your course notes, I've described in detail what these core resources are, what they look like, and why they are so important. So I'm actually going to urge you, if you're a serious teacher, to have a look at that. Then I've mentioned previously this notion of building up knowledge of spelling word banks. So at first we're just teaching children to read words, to spell words, but over time there is no way getting around for it. They need to know which words are spelt where, and this is built into the programs over time. So here, sort of halfway through Phonics International, we've got spelling stories. So that one-page story there, it is a spelling story where there'll be lots of words with the focus bit of code in. We've also got a picture, we've got comprehension questions, we've got word lists. Because what you're doing is you're providing an activity to glue those words together in memory. So if the child was then asked, now which words with the ul sound at the end are spelt this way, you've given them something to help them recall that. Equally in Floppy's Phonics, we are also building up spelling word banks over time. And in No Nonsense Phonics Skills, we've got material at the end of each book which is focused on spelling word banks. And book 9 alternate spelling word banks with little decodable mini stories. When you do spelling word bank work, you need to quantify how many words featured in any specific word bank. Today, we're aiming to learn these 8 words in the spelling word bank. And then things like write, act out, and or illustrate the banks of words with the same sounds and spelling alternatives, but only ever focus on one specific letter sound correspondence during any one session. The role of the alphabet poster and the role of the alphabetic code chart. These are 2 different notions with some overlaps. So as a teacher, you need to be very clear how to distinguish these 2 notions, the alphabet and the alphabetic code. So what do we need the alphabet for? For example, learning alphabetical order. And that's best learnt through an alphabet song where you can sing through letter names. But I'm not associating letter names with any reading activities at all. Handwriting, you need starting points for forming the letters and how the letters sit on writing lines. It can double for saying the sounds as well, so you can learn letter names for singing an alphabet song or point to various letters for saying the sounds. And remember that capital letters are the same code as the lowercase letters. So here are all of the features of learning about the alphabet. And then when we refer to capital letters, we can explain that they are used for special reasons, such as with the beginning of children's names or the beginning of sentences and so on. And then children are already being exposed to such a wide variation of fonts in children's storybooks, on computers, on whatever screen activity they're doing. So you can talk about and show different fonts and make them aware that they're all the same letter and sound. It's like children just wearing a different t-shirt or a different dress. So I've got a nice free game if you go to phonicsintervention.org where there's directions for using to focus on different fonts. Air writing is a nice way to engage a lot of children at the same time, but when you model air writing, don't face the children, face the same way as the children, and don't write in reverse, because children are more likely to see an action than they are a letter shape in the air. So when it comes to being a good teacher, always do exactly what you want the children to do with your modelling. If you have known left-handers, sit them on your left sitting behind you and try and model with your left hand. So model with your right hand for right-handers for air writing and your left hand for left-handers. Print or joined handwriting. Now, I'm actually very concerned at the moment because there's a growing movement to teach reception age children and year 1 children a form of letter shape which starts with a lead-in join with a view to thinking about later joined handwriting. And I strongly advise against that. Just teach reception and year 1 children plain print, no joins, no lead-in joins at all, and teach the print really well. And then later, when they're competent at that, you can teach a fully joined style with the lead-ins, but don't muddle the 2. I have a handwriting site with free patter, free resources, free video guidance, which if you're interested in my thoughts and way of doing things, you can go to that site. Now, if you are a classroom teacher, visual display is tremendously important. And it's not about having letter shapes on butterflies or trains or cars to try and interest and motivate the children. Just stick to what's appropriate and keep all the child-friendly things for art and when it's fit for purpose. So select a key display wall or walls for your focus phonics teaching. There are some visual things you need to be permanent, like your alphabetic code chart and your alphabet poster. There are some things you need to display cumulatively, like your freeze posters or grouping the spelling alternative posters. And there are some things that you need to make by hand or do as handmade extras, because no phonics program or language program can provide you with everything you need. There are thousands of words in the English language, and at some point you are going to need words or help with spelling beyond what your phonics program can provide. So Floppy's Phonics has got a superb poster range along the lines as I was thinking of for Phonics International. And it's also got some photocopyable posters which can be made for wall display or even for in the children's phonics folders. So they're adaptable for how you can use them. And then you've got these things that you can personalise as you need. Now these Say the Sounds posters are absolutely fantastic. So what you need to do is saturate the environment with them so that children are constantly revisiting and reviewing these bits of code when they line up to go out or around the classroom in their continuous provision. So with Say the Sounds posters, you're seeing the graphemes and saying the sounds and hearing the sounds and pointing to the graphemes, but also with paper-based ones, children can assess themselves and tick what they think they know and circle what they think they don't know. So Say the Sounds posters can include versions which are in order of how you've introduced in the programme, and then also jumbled so that children don't just get used to saying things in order. And you can use them as a saturation type resource, but also for periodic assessment for your teacher's records. Say the Sounds posters are also in Floppy's Phonics because they are just so very helpful, and they're in no-nonsense phonics skills. And then a resource that's in all of the programmes are these things called multi-skills activity sheets. These are absolutely fantastic. And don't let anyone tell you that using a mini whiteboard is a substitute for these activities, because it absolutely is not. I've got grave concerns about overuse or wrong use of mini whiteboards. We need children to be absolutely supported with content that they can own and repeat and share at home or share for intervention and so on. Now, there is such an aversion to the notion of worksheets by many teachers that I had to call upon Her Majesty's inspectors to talk about this. And the response was that a worksheet can be highly effective in consolidating learning and can be used as an effective assessment tool. And worksheets, therefore, can be a useful resource when designed specifically to meet children's needs, which is exactly what I've done with my activity sheets, whatever format they're in. They've got exactly what the children are learning for code and word level. And these particular ones have got guidance for the adults, they've got handwriting practice, a drawing opportunity, and you fold up for spelling. They're fantastic. And they don't just get wiped off without any accountability or any opportunity to revise. So here's another type of design, but it's exactly the same thing with the same content. It's just another style of doing it, and you can still fold up. This is in the early years starter package, and it's the ones I've compiled in the series of 8 eBooks. And when you get to this type of activity sheet and you fold up for the spelling routine, you draw a line down the centre to create 2 columns. And when you give children words to spell, first of all, they have to point into which column they think they're going to spell the word. And then don't let them spell it with the wrong spelling alternative. If you see them pointing to the wrong column, you can say, no, you need this column, because this is teaching and learning and not assessment. So as you can see, you've got a whole range of activity sheets, ending with the one on the right, which belongs to Unit 12 of Phonics International. And if you look at the level of the vocabulary, you will note that Phonics International's vocabulary goes way beyond infants. And so Phonics International can make a serious contribution to spelling in Key Stage 2 or juniors. In the no-nonsense phonics skills materials, there's guidance in the teaching books for how to do all the phonics routines and how to mark. So children mark their own work as well as the adult marks the work, and this is the same throughout all my programmes. Children work in pencil, adults work in pens. And there's some video footage here where you can see children doing their own work, and they use this content because it's actually tangible and permanent. They can start their teaching and learning cycle with revisit and review of old learning because they've each got their own work and they can work at their own speed and build up confidence and fluency. So although I'm not saying never do paired work, I prefer that children will have a go at these activities themselves independently before working with a partner or working with a teacher. So in effect then, the notion of I do as the teacher, we do, you do as the pupil, soon becomes you do yourself, and then we'll go over it as a whole class or a group. So once children are trained in what to do with these activity sheets, it's very straightforward for them to just get on with it, and they can, and if you go through it first, you've stolen the learning from the child. So basically train them in what to do and then let them get on with it. Then for the spelling, the activity sheets fold up so they can still see the new or focus letter or letter group. And then you give them some words to spell, and they do the sounds, or you can support them with that if they're still at that early stage. Tally and count the sounds. Do the sound dashes top left. This is not a very good example because those sound dashes aren't long enough, because I found it hard to do them on the computer. And then they can go to have a go at spelling that word. And then if there's a missing sound dash, they know they've missed something out. So you can help them and train them in how to identify what sound is missing and what letter is missing. Now, they can't just tick these spellings without an adult seeing them first, because this is not about invented or phonically plausible spelling. It's about spellings being correct. So if you see children have not got the spelling correct, you need to help them with that to get it correct. Now, I've referred to cumulative texts, and there are certain patterns of activity you can do with texts. So the first one is that children can work at their own speed when they're ready for independent practice. A grapheme search is where they look at the print and underline the focus letter or letter group. Then they can decode it, meaning they go ahead to read it. What does it mean? A self-dictation is when they can reread a sentence, hold it in their head and go on and write it in a little lined exercise book. And then they can also check themselves with what's in the print they've been given. Convert to joined writing means that when you are at the process of teaching joined writing, they can copy it and just do it in joined handwriting, or do a self-dictation and write in joined handwriting. When they're ready at the age and stage, they can write an extension sentence. They can illustrate what the meaning is, and for illustrations, make sure that it matches the content well of the text. And periodically, you can give a formal teacher dictation for your teacher records. And in Phonics International, there are comprehension questions available. And all of this extra practice that belongs to each child will accelerate learning. Floppy's Phonics have also got activity books. Now, the content is the same as in the photocopyable content of Teaching Handbook 1 and 2. So activity sheets and cumulative text are provided in the handbooks. But if schools or parents prefer to just not be bothered with the photocopying and want the ready-made material, it's available throughout this series. And there are 5 activity books throughout the whole programme. The phonics exercise book is that each child has their own exercise book, preferably with writing lines and preferably not too wide apart. And you can use it for anything. Personalised phonics, incidental teaching, additional teaching, handwriting, for extension activities, self-dictations and teacher dictations. There's lots of ways to differentiate according to the ability in the class or the stage of learning. They access their core resources differently, at their own level, at their own speed. They do their own practice, and so they're not having to work to the speed, whether it's too fast for them or slowing them down according to how their peers in the classroom work. You always give an extension activity or instruction at the outset. So this means there's no downtime. So if you know you have particularly fast children, tell them exactly what you want them to do if you're not ready to gather the whole class together. You have different levels of supervision and support. So some children are so able to take this on board, they don't even need any supervision other than an eye across the classroom. Whereas some children need you to be there to help them along the way as necessary. but don't do the work for the slower to learn children, because again it robs them of the learning. Now, phonics is often associated with speedy work, but this is unfair because some children will never be speedy. Even if they know the code and see the letter and say the sounds, they might do it slowly. So please don't over-pressurize children to be speedy. The book bag routine is where, if the school has a book bag routine, the learner's phonics folder goes in there with the paper-based work, and it goes backwards and forwards to home. It can inform home as discharging your duty, or you can aspire for them to read again to home. If English is an additional language, you can actually teach the people at home, if they need it, along with the children. And when appropriate, you can give a decodable reading book and any other books, as long as the adults at home know that they're not for the children to read independently. Right, I've absolutely run through this webinar, but if you've got any questions, please contact me at debbie@phonicsinternational.com. And if you like the kind of things that I'm saying and talking about, we provide a comprehensive but not difficult self-study online course for only £20, which you could access by that link below. Thank you for your patience. Bye.